Let me read you something. This is from Dr. Ben and Candy Carson. He's just written this. I'm just going to read this for everyone here in total. Regarding all of the racial and political strife emanating from the events in Charlottesville last week, and let me relate a story. Several years ago, we bought a farm in rural Maryland. One of the neighbors immediately put up a Confederate flag. A friend of ours, who was African-American, three-star general, was coming to visit and immediately turned around, concluding that he was in the wrong place. Interestingly, all the other neighbors immediately put up American flags, shaming the other neighbor who took down the Confederate flag. More recently, our home in Virginia, along with that of a neighbor, was vandalized by people who also wrote hateful rhetoric about President Trump. We were out of town, but other kind, embarrassed neighbors cleaned up most of the mess before we returned. In both instances, less than kind behavior was met by people taking the high road. We could all learn from these examples. Hatred and bigotry, unfortunately, still exists in our country, and we must all continue to fight it. But let's use the right tools. It ends, by the way, that neighbor who put up the Confederate flag subsequently became friendly. That is the likely outcome if we just learn to be neighborly and to get to know each other. What do you make of that?
Well, it's an unremarkable statement. I understand that Dr. Carson may feel like he finds himself in a difficult position because he's a member of the Trump cabinet, but he's not confronting the basic issues. Donald Trump essentially lifted up an argument advanced by neo-Nazis, the KKK and others, that the Confederacy is all about tradition and heritage. What exactly is the tradition and heritage that the Confederacy represents? Is it slavery, rape, kidnap, treason, lynching, Jim Crow, or all of the above? It's a phony argument. And the niceties that Ben Carson articulated are not going to get us past the legacy of slavery and hate that still exists in some quarters in this country.
Tim Jeffries, Congress. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The worst firestorm President Trump has faced in his 200-plus days in office has now deepened. 2 of his CEO advisory groups created to promote job growth now gone, disbanding in the wake of his controversial remarks in the violence in Charlottesville, remarks that placed blame on racists and counter-protesters alike, with the president appearing to defend the neo-Nazis, the KKK, and the white supremacists. The heads of both Campbell's Soup and 3M were the latest to announce their exit from the president's advisory councils, the 7th and 8th executives to do so. Shortly after those announcements, the president confirmed this on Twitter, that he was disbanding both councils. With me now, CNN senior economics analyst Stephen Moore, who used to advise the Trump campaign, and CNN global economic analyst Rana Foroohar. She is also a global business columnist and associate editor for the Financial Times. Stephen, let me just begin with you. How big of a blow is this for the White House?
Well, I just have to respond to that previous interview because I found it unbelievably shocking, and I want to make sure I get this right because I don't want to misquote. A 2-bit racial hustler? A congressman called our president a 2-bit racial hustler? What kind of language is that to use by a congressman about a president? You can disagree with what he said, but I think those are pretty emotionally charged words. And when it comes to this economic council, you know, look, the CEOs have to do what's in the best interest of their companies and follow their own conscience. I had warned the White House that, you know, at the first time there was any controversy that these CEOs, who most of them were not for Trump in the first place, would probably abandon them. I predicted this kind of thing would happen, and so it's not surprising to me that you're seeing a lot of these folks leave this council. In the meetings that I was in when Trump would have these council meetings, by the way, they really truly were listening, tours where Donald Trump would sit around the table and listen to these CEOs and ask them, you know, what do you need from the federal government? How do you want it to work better? How can we in the federal government help you create jobs? That's what it was all about, and it's a shame that this this council now has to be. I believe, Brooke, it's being disbanded.
You know,
it is. Go ahead, Ron.
Brooke, I got to jump in here and say I spoke to many people this morning in the C-suite, and the reports that I got were that many of these meetings didn't go well at all, and there have been concerns even since the Paris Accord, frankly, amongst a lot of these CEOs, a lot of internal hand-wringing about whether they should be involved with the White House or not. They told me the meetings had not been going well. The proper officials from various federal departments weren't even in attendance. And I think that this really marks a tipping point. And I think this is a huge deal for the Trump administration and the White House. If you think about it, Brooke, for starters, the Strategic Committee had already decided to disband before President Trump tweeted that this morning following a conference call that was led by Steve Schwartzman, the CEO of Blackstone. When you think about the business community losing faith in the White House and also labor, you know, Richard Trumka, the head of the AFL-CIO, had already resigned. That's two core groups. That's the business community and working class white men. And I think this is a real blow for the White House.
Well, but
Stephen,
wait a minute. You
go
just
ahead and
said,
respond.
hold on. I just want to respond to that.
Please do.
You said that a lot of these CEOs basically decided they didn't want to be part of this when Trump pulled out of the Paris.
There have been hand-wringing since the Paris
But let me make a point about this.
People.
Go ahead, Stephen.
A lot of these CEOs basically said they didn't want to be a part of this because Trump wanted to drop out of the Paris Accord. But guess what? Donald Trump said he was going to do that during the campaign. So if they didn't want to be part of a council with somebody who was going to pull us out of the Paris Accord, then why did they join the council in the first place?
You
a
know
lot
what?
of them
They
did that because of the prestige.
Stephen. They joined it for two reasons: because they believed that you should join a council when your president asked you to, but also later on because they wanted to keep some adults in the around important policy conversations like tax reform, infrastructure.
But my point is, when he did, he said what he's going to do. When he said he was going to do what he was going to do, then why did they? Oh, I'm so outraged by this. They knew his positions when they took these positions. Now look,
folks have been trying to influence the president and the White House around things like the skills agenda, around infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying that many of them possibly shouldn't have taken a stand and stood down earlier. But I think let's not fool ourselves. The entire business community has been worried about the Trump agenda for some time, and the disaster that is his handling of Charlottesville is just the apex of that.
Okay, but let me make a point. What is business really, mostly concerned about? What are CEOs concerned about? About a healthy economy. And my goodness, I mean, has any president in the first 6 months delivered a healthier economy than Donald Trump? I mean, you're seeing a boom in jobs. You're seeing a pickup in optimism. You're seeing a pickup in employment. I made this point yesterday on CNN. It's worth repeating that for all the talk about how Donald Trump has an anti-black agenda, this is a president who's created black jobs just in the first 6 months in office at twice the pace that Barack Obama did.
I'm sorry, God bless you. Or we fact-check the fact that Donald Trump does not deserve credit for anything good that has happened in the American economy in the last
he doesn't get any credit for this. Right, exactly. How should he get credit? He was there, but I mean, the stock market didn't go through the roof the day after. Oh no, actually, it did go through the roof the day after the election.
Share buybacks because they can do
right.
them
It's Barack Obama's economy, right?
Janet,
I'm just sitting here and listening to the two of you go back and forth. Clearly very different views.
But look, Brooke, this is my point, though. I mean, people, this absurd argument that Trump doesn't deserve the credit for the.
No, I don't think that's the conversation. Honestly, let's leave that. We've had that conversation.
That people can't even give credit to Trump for the things that's gone right. So there's this. A lot of this is just against Trump's agenda, no matter what he does.
Okay, let's move past that. Here's my question for you, Stephen. The president now is in this position where he's the one, ending these councils, but that's not entirely factual. He had no choice. He had no choice, so why spin it that way?
Well, look, I don't remember exactly how many people were on the. I mean, this was a pretty big council. I mean, he has 4 or 5 of these business councils. When people start dropping off the council, it's probably a pretty good idea to fold it up. But look, he has a number. I think there are 6 or 7 of these business industry councils that he's put together to seek advice from the business leaders of the country. And by the way, for the people who are dropping out,
Stephen, hang on, he called them grandstanders in that tweet yesterday, and essentially said he could just replace them. But he's choosing not to replace them. He's just closing down the councils. I
hope he does replace them, because I think it is important for Donald Trump to get good advice.
I'll be curious. Wants to serve. I think the business community has lost faith in this president. He hasn't accomplished any of his agenda, and he hasn't shown the kind of leadership that a president should. And that's what I'm hearing from all the CEOs that I talk to.
Well, but it's ridiculous to say he hasn't accomplished any of his agenda. He's only been in office for 6 months. We've already seen the U.S. GDP go from 1.5% and declining under Obama to 2.6% and rising under Trump.
Nothing to do with him, Stephen, and you know that's true.
Right. It doesn't have anything to do with his policies. Right.
Okay. Stephen and Rana. Whew, it's just Wednesday. It's just Wednesday. Thank you. Both of you. Coming up next. May have shocked the nation with his sudden about-face on the Nazis and white supremacists who invaded Charlottesville, Virginia. But many who have actually followed Donald Trump long before he became president say they're not surprised. In fact, his critics claim his stance on racial issues is quite well known, from his birther attacks on President Obama to refusing to accept the innocence of the so-called Central Park Five.
The state of Hawaii says this is official. He was born in Hawaii on this date. Here it is. Why do you deny that?
A lot of people do not think it was an authentic certificate.
How can you say that if
you won't report it, Wolf, but many people do not think it was authentic.
Donald, you're beginning to sound a little ridiculous. I have to tell
I think you are, Wolf.
Do you accept that President Obama was born in the United States,
No,
is not Muslim?
I really don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Wolf, but many people do not think it was authentic.
Donald, you're beginning to sound a little ridiculous. I have to tell
I think you are, Wolf.
Do you accept that President Obama was born in the United States, is not Muslim?
I really don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
I don't know why he wouldn't release his records. But, you know, honestly, I don't want to get into it. The problem we have is we don't have any protection for the policeman. The problem with our society is that the victim has absolutely no rights and the criminal has unbelievable rights. Unbelievable rights. And I say it has to stop. That's why I took the ad. And I have to tell you, that ad, I've never done anything that's been so positively received. Of course I hate these people. And let's all hate these people, because maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done.
Well, the Central Park Five was a group of teenagers, black and Latino, who were wrongly convicted of a brutal 1989 beating and rape of a Central Park jogger. The crime inflamed the city and really the country, and it also prompted Trump to take out an ad in 4 newspapers demanding the state of New York reinstate the death penalty. The real rapist confessed in 2002. To date, President Trump has never apologized for his comments about the case, nor publicly accepted the fact that all 5 men did not commit the crime. So with me now, 2 members of the Central Park Five, Yusuf Salaam, who was 15 at the time of his arrest, and Raymond Santana, who was all of 14. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having us.
Yusuf, just starting with you, going back, you once called Trump a fire starter and said he lit the match for all the backlash that you faced. When you watched the president standing in Trump Tower talking about Charlottesville and the groups on both sides, how did you feel?
I think it's despicable and deplorable for him to, at this point in the game, to spend April 19th. There was a rush to judgment, and it was a stoking of the fire in a similar way. Him saying that this group and this group were both equally wrong caused the death of a woman. Horrible and horrific.
So you're saying if there was a rush to judgment in the case judging you back then, why wasn't there a rush to judgment over the weekend in Charlottesville?
Well, what I'm saying is that the idiocracy of saying that you want to be able to judge the facts when we see that this is clearly American terrorism that's going on.
Right.
You got folks running around chanting and chanting and chanting, and
right.
You got folks running around chanting and chanting and chanting, and I mean we've all seen it. We've all seen what was going on.
It's evil. On its face, it's evil.
It's absolute evil. And I think that for this to be the ideal of make America great again, this is making America hate again.
Raymond, same question to you, and just listening to the president yesterday, how he's essentially giving these protesters, the benefit of the doubt, something I imagine you would say he never gave you.
Yeah, he never gave us the benefit of the doubt. And to sit there and say, like, you had to look at both sides was totally wrong. At the end of the day, these people came and they were protesting a statue that represented hate. It represented bigotry. It represented keeping us, people of color, oppressed. It represented making us slaves again. And so that was the root of it. And he never once touched on the root. Why these people were here to represent, to protest against this statue in the first place?
You have people
the slaves again. And so that was the root of it. And he never once touched on the root. Why these people were here to represent, to protest against this statue in the first place?
You have people. Let me come back to the statues because that is a whole other piece of this conversation. But to both of you, Yusuf, you have all these people now on social media, on TV, asking this question: why are we surprised, right? That Trump has this history of insensitivity when it comes to race. You've been arguing this for decades.
Well, you know, Donald Trump comes on the heel of President Barack Obama. And President Barack Obama gave us a tremendous sense of a hope that we needed as a nation, this ideal that we can get past a lot of the things that we're seeing that are coming out today. And I think the surprise that a lot of people are experiencing that we haven't experienced is a surprise that hopefully this person who has become the president is going to maybe grow into his presidency, is going to maybe change with the time. But I think that when you're talking about a person who is, for all intents and purposes, probably my grandfather's age, he's already solidified in the type of person that he is. He's never changed. He's never shown us anything other than what he's showing us now. We actually need to be able to say, no, we always knew it. We shouldn't have never gone down the road of making this person the president of these United States, because as we see, everything that's happening is.
But he is the president. I mean, I just have to point out the fact is he's
not my president.
He's the 45th president of this country.
He's 45th. He's 45th.
He's not my president. I ain't vote for him. He's not my president.
You know, I mean, but there should be no surprises. Basically, what I'm saying. If you look at the track record, if you look at everything, you know, I mean, but there should be no surprises. Basically, what I'm saying. If you look at the track record, if you look at everything that he's done, the people, I think, were enamored by the fact that he got a nice, you know, loan from his dad and was able to rise up the ladder of success. But that really was not a real truth telling in terms of how that even happened as well, you know.
We could, there are documentaries, there are all kinds of lanes we could go down.
Yeah, absolutely.
But on right now, Raymond, I mean, if you're saying he's not your president, and God forbid something like Charlottesville happens again, I mean, these neo-Nazis are threatening to come back.
Yes.
And if you are not looking to the president to lead, who are you looking to?
Then we're looking at Democrats, we're looking at Republicans, we're looking at other public figures, those who can step in and calm the situation down, those who have stepped up and they denounce, you know, white supremacy. And this is what they're supposed to do. These are also our leaders, you know, in the political field. They're supposed to take that step forward if the president can't do it. This is why they're there.
And these monuments, you know, we've seen these monuments and flags coming down, and that's become this whole conversation. But at the end of the day, and I realize it symbolizes a tremendous amount for a huge percentage of this country, but at the same time, how much does that really fix the root issue?
Well, it's part of the root issue because nobody has.
How much does that really fix the root issue?
Well, it's part of the root issue because nobody has sat down and said, okay, if George Washington has owned slaves, Jackson has owned slaves, you know, do they deserve these statues also? It's like everybody has forgotten what, you know, people of color have been fighting for. They've been fighting for an equal opportunity, an equal chance to be successful. And those statues represent oppression at the end of the day. Even though they're considered our forefathers, but they still represent oppression. They represent how this country was built on the back of our ancestors. And it's wrong.
Last question, just quickly, Yusuf, do you have hope?
I have tremendous hope in us. I think that when the most poignant statement I've heard in the last few years was from Michelle Obama. And she said, when they go low, we go high. And I think it's us. I think ultimately it's us. It's up to us to make sure that we be the change that we seek, as Gandhi said. I think that when we move in that manner, and we're talking about moving forward and moving into a progressive state, then there's no room for hate in the future that we see and we seek as a people for ourselves. And that's the total. When I look at we the people, I know that that statement back then wasn't written from the perspective of us as we are. I think ultimately it's us. It's up to us to make sure that we be the change that we seek, as Gandhi said. I think that when we move in that manner, and we're talking about moving forward and moving into a progressive state, then there's no room for hate in the future that we see and we seek as a people for ourselves. And that's the total. When I look at we the people, I know that that statement back then wasn't written from the perspective of us as we are today. But when I look at it today, we are the people. We are that melting pot of America And we are here. And there's nothing that can be done about it except for us to move forward and progress together.
Yusuf and Raymond, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Now for more on just what all of this means for our country, Errol Lewis is with us, CNN political commentator, a political anchor at Spectrum News, CNN political commentator S.E. Cupp, and host of HLN's S.E. Cupp Unfiltered, which debuts Monday. Cultural critic and writer Michaela Angela Davis, she is back. Danny Zucker, one of the executive producers of the sitcom Modern Family, who is engaged in numerous Twitter spats with Donald Trump. So welcome to all of you. And Errol, let me just turn to you first. You know, just ingesting so much of this, it feels like the past couple of days really feel like a sad moment in this nation. It feels like a page turn. It feels like, in a sense, not to sound like Chicken Little, but the sky is falling politically, socially on the president. What does he recover? How does the nation recover?
How does the nation recover is the question. And in fact, I think it's the sort of the turning of the question has been, if anything, a bit of a ray of light here, meaning the president has abdicated his responsibility. It's his responsibility to bring the nation together, to speak clearly on something like Nazi flags and terrorist murder are bad things. He abdicated that responsibility. So we've seen business leaders, military leaders, religious leaders, all stepping forward, protesters in the streets even, her parents, other eloquent voices coming together and sort of saying, we're going to have to do what the president should have done. And he is in some ways making himself less and less relevant as sort of a central leading figure. What he has done is not leadership. What the country is doing, what different people are deciding and recognizing, which is the way it should be in a democracy, is that we ourselves are the leaders.
Let's talk about the leaders in our country as far as even on the Republican side. A number of Republicans have, of course, denounced racism like that's not breaking news. But the fact is, John McCain, S.E., did call out the president by name. There is no moral equivalency between racists and Americans standing up to defy hate and bigotry. The president of the United States should say so. So why are the other leaders not calling the president out? What are they afraid of?
Well, I actually think you've seen most Republican members, to a person, denounce what President Trump said.
Right, but they're not calling the president out by name.
Well, that would be great if they had that moral fortitude, but I think it is enough to say that there is no moral equivalence between neo-Nazis and those who would condemn them. I thought what Richard was saying earlier was interesting, that business leaders were having to walk a fine line. I don't think it's a fine line. I think actually on this issue, it's a really easy decision. Donald Trump is on an island of his own. This issue was settled 70 years ago by a global community. There's no one, save for neo-Nazis themselves, who defend neo-Nazis. So whether it's Republicans in leadership, business leaders, name another group, it's not a difficult thing to go out and say, no, we don't see this equivalence.
I'm pressing you, and I'm curious, Michaela, what you think. Because even the Senate Majority Leader, right, Mitch McConnell, according to Manu Raju's reporting, he has said privately that he is upset with the president over how he's handled Charlottesville. But apparently he doesn't want to say it publicly. He's afraid of how it may be perceived because of the public spat between the two of them.
Well, that's cowardly.
But that's where I'm going, because he isn't saying this publicly, and if you're saying it's not a huge deal that these senior leaders aren't calling the president out.
For elected leaders, whether it's Paul Ryan or John McCain or Orrin Hatch or Mitch McConnell, to denounce this. I think it's less important to denounce Donald Trump in particular, but not doing so is cowardly. There's no way around it. That's the coward's position.
So first, I think that Heather Heyer is an American woman, patriot, who lost her life in service of the American project. I want to say that first.
Yes.
And I also want to say that 96% of Black women did not vote for Trump. Hashtag not our shame. Secondly, he is not alone. He is one bigoted, narcissistic, small man that 53 million people gave him a lot of power. It is easy to just look at Donald Trump, but there are 53 million people that decided to vote for him. Who are they? There's the GOP.
Not all neo-Nazis or white supremacists.
But here's the thing.
The point I'm making.
Here's what we're grappling with, right? When David Duke tweeted quite accurately White Americans voted for you. White Americans that made you president. Don't ever forget. That's who voted for him. So what is happening now is the soul of white America is having to reckon with itself. It's having to reckon with the idea that we started a country on a remarkable document, genocide and slavery. That is what that's at the core of all of these issues. Donald Trump is a flashpoint. Donald Trump was made in America. So we have to look at what we made and who is with him and who doesn't. This is not, where are the brave people? This is the land of the free and the home of the brave. Be brave now. This is what was happening on that street. You saw white Americans fighting this idea. It is a civil war. It's been a civil war online for a long time. Like since 2008, when that beautiful, brilliant, Black first family walked into that White House, it began. The Civil War began online. And yesterday, in Charlottesville, that was the battle. And Heather Heyer lost her life as an American patriot in this battle for white America to reckon with its history. For real this time.
I want to be clear, though, and I say this because I have Trump voters in my family, friends. I've met hundreds of Trump voters. To a person, none would say, I really want him to defend neo-Nazis in my name. Not a single one. And I think while white America can be generalized and lumped in with this awful group of repugnant people, that's only going to get him reelected. And I'm a conservative who didn't vote for Trump, and I don't want to empower his reelection. So we should be clear about people who voted for Trump and why. And not all economic frustrations of white people are based in a desire for ethnic cleansing and superior races. That's not every Trump voter.
That's on the extreme, and I never said that. What I'm saying is that this is an opportunity for America to really reckon with its history. So you may not have voted for a neo-Nazi, but you voted for someone that wanted to jail the Central Park Five. We're from New York. We know who he is. We know him putting C's on people's applications. We know that what he said about Mexicans. We know what he said about women. We know what he said about Barack Obama. This is not new. This new shock is ridiculous.
We have two of the Central Park Five we're talking to in a little bit, just on, obviously their point is, why are people surprised that this is the man that they saw several years ago? But Danny, I just want to make sure I get you in on the conversation. And just because you're far away, I want to hear from you equally. Obviously, your thoughts first on this conversation. Then I want to ask you about some of these central figures in the White House. But go ahead. You've been listening.
Yeah, well, my thoughts on this conversation is the reason we're here is because we don't call out Donald Trump. I mean, I think it is important to call him out by name. And hearing that Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan are privately upset about it it's so easy to say Nazis are bad. We have to say that the president is bad for not saying Nazis are bad. And
but why do you think? Because then the question becomes, maybe if they come out and they call him out by name, what can they then get done for this country when they all return in September? Do you think that's part of the thinking?
I would ask what they are getting done right now. And I just feel that you have this guy, Trump, who is so afraid to call out Nazism. My grandfather actually had to fight Nazis. All he has to do is say Nazis are bad. And I think all the Republican Party has to do is say that Donald Trump is bad for not calling out Nazis. Let's call it what it is, admit your mistake, and move on. I mean, but I don't see that happening.
But let me stay with you, Danny, because you look at Jewish members of his family. I mean, you look at his son-in-law, you look at his daughter, you look at Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin, both of whom were standing there in Trump Tower. Reportedly, Cohn is upset and devastated, but they're still standing there. Do you think they should do more?
Yes, I think they should resign. I think it's awfully cowardly. I think by not speaking out, you're endorsing it. I think it's a huge problem right now for us. And I don't respect, I wouldn't stand next to somebody who couldn't say Nazis are bad, not just because I'm a Jewish person, but because I'm an American. We fought for that. That's just sort of basic to me.
Carol, where are Ivanka and Jared? They always seem to be away when big moments.
Yeah, there's this long-standing theory that when they go away, either because of the Sabbath or because they're on vacation, the president has no restraining influences and flies off the handle. very possible. You know, we've got a lot of reporting on Powell's intrigue. That's the easy stuff. Maybe we'll find out. I think, though, that there's some interesting stuff that I've been reading today, written by and for Orthodox Jews, writing one to another. A very interesting kind of conversation going on, saying this has gone completely off the rails. I mean, there's been so much remarkable tragedy over the last few days that if you go back and find it, the flyers that were supposed to be I guess the organizing flyers to try and advertise the Charlottesville hate rally. It's, you know, it's a Star of David and a stylized figure smashing it with a hammer. This kind of stuff. This has been out there. We've had all kinds. You know, the preliminary chant. You know, less than 24 hours before the murder took place was Jews will not replace us, right?
It's
so
crazy.
This is in your face, and it's right here. And for every single person, whether you're a wealthy, powerful CEO, whether you're a general in the United States Army, whether you're a minister of the gospel, or whether you're just a person who's wondering what to do, everybody's got to make a decision. That applies to Ivanka Trump. That applies to Jared Kushner. That applies to everybody. And so the president has, I think, set something in motion or allowed some things to happen that are, at this point, much larger than the presidency itself. We've got to really sort of figure out who we are, what we believe in, and what we all intend to do.
And there's a lot of people in pain. There's a lot of pain.
We're going to talk to a lot of those people, and also folks who say, well, why do we need to tear down the flags and the Confederate monuments? I want to hear from everyone for now. Thank you all very much, and Danny, to you from afar there in LA. Thank you as well.
Thank you so much.
So what does the U.S. do with these monuments and these statues? We'll talk live with one man who's arguing keep them up. And New Yorkers are saying they have known about this president for decades. We'll talk to two members of the Central Park Five who Donald Trump, way back in the day, targeted in 4 newspapers this full-page ad. And the family of a Nazi at the rally denouncing him. You will hear from the man's nephew about their confrontations at home about race. So much to discuss. You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin.
Is CNN breaking news?
Here we go, top of the hour. You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. The breaking news continues. This presidency in crisis. It gets worse. Just in, 2 of the president's CEO groups for jobs now totally gone, disbanding in the wake of the president's controversial remarks about the violence in Charlottesville. Heads up, any moment now, we may get the first images of the day of President Trump as the nation witnesses its leader place blame on both racists and counter-protesters, appearing to defend the neo-Nazis, the KKK, the white supremacists. It happened during this, lots of adjectives you could go with. We'll go with meltdown of a news conference at Trump Tower just a day after his speech on teleprompter there to try to correct the first one in which he would not call out bigotry fully and unequivocally. And now the fallout is hitting hard. The president just confirming on Twitter as more and more CEOs pull away. The heads of Campbell Soup and 3M just dropped out of the manufacturing group, making them number 7 and number 8 executives to depart. I want you to listen to what Campbell's leader has said. Quote, racism and murder are unequivocally responsible and are not morally equivalent to anything else that happened in Charlottesville. I believe the president should have been and still needs to be unambiguous on that point, she writes. With me now to begin, CNN business correspondent Richard Quest. Richard, these additional drop-offs, how significant?
Oh, enormously. Look, these additional drop-offs, not just the Campbell Soup, but the 3M, but also the unions and Under Armour and the Alliance yesterday. Look, what was happening is that the herd mentality was starting. Cover was being given to chief execs who were now seen as being, they were getting pressure from investors, pressure from shareholders, pressure from employees, pressure from friends and family. And what was at risk from the president's point of view is that more and more and more would leave the councils, and so then decided to go for the nuclear option, which was to abandon them, disband the councils before he could be embarrassed any further. This is a case here, Brooke, of the president firing the councils before they could all quit.
Yesterday, the president tweeted, we talked about this, for every CEO that drops out of the manufacturing council, I have many to take their place. Grandstanders should not have gone on. Jobs if you're a mega member of the business community in this country, why do you want to help the president at a time like this?
You're balancing a very, very difficult act here, because on the one hand, he's still the president of the United States, elected by the people and the head of state. On the other hand, you have all these rampant controversies going deep into the sewers. And you've got to balance that between not annoying one versus not annoying the other. I think what's important here also is this strategic and policy forum that was disbanded. Now, this is a very high-level group of CEOs that was probably more important than the Manufacturing Council. But it also had several very strong and leading members of the American Jewish community that were taking part in it. And I'm guessing, from what I've heard anyway, from what people have told me, that there's an enormous amount of pressure, particularly his refusal to criticize when you heard those marchers in Charlottesville saying about Jews will not replace us. Put all this together, and what you have here, Brooke, and it's fascinating, it's worrying, but it's the first time we're really seeing this. Corporate America has become the moral compass that is leading the argument.
Corporate America, but you also have Joint Chiefs, the military, very unusually weighing in, denouncing a lot of this as well, the military. Richard Quest, thank you so much for that. And as the president...
Others should have to do this.
The third-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. And what do you think? I just want to get your immediate reaction to these CEOs, these other business leaders bolting from these two councils because of the president's statements or lack of statements.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Wolf. I think what these CEOs are doing, we're demonstrating what this country is all about. I congratulate them on stepping aside from the charade. Ken Frazier, just a great friend, and I thank him so much for leading the charge on this. What we see now is a tremendous credibility gap, a morality gap that is developing in this country, and the business community is stepping up to do its part to fill that gap. Now it's time for the United States Congress to step in. Someone said earlier on your show that the president cannot fire the Congress. That is correct. And the Congress needs to demonstrate that we are, in fact, a co-equal branch of government. And I think that it's time for the Speaker of the House, the leader of the House, the Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, and for both Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell to bring together their leadership teams, and let's begin to put together an approach to governance that will bring people together, that will pass legislation that will move this country forward and pass it in a bipartisan way. Get 145 House members on the Republican side, 145 Democrats, and let's get the 290 votes that are necessary to have a veto-proof piece of legislation, pass it, send it to the president. If he doesn't sign it, let's override the veto and let's go forward. Same thing in the Senate. 35 senators on either side will pass legislation. We've got to bring this country together. And I think that when you have a moral crisis in the White House, and that's what we've got, it's time for us in the Congress as a co-equal branch to step into the gap and bring this country together. We can do it. We did it back in 2008. We did bipartisan legislation to bring this country back from the brink of economic disaster. We are now approaching the brink of what I would call a morality disaster, a moral disaster in this country. I think the Congress can serve that same purpose here today. And so I'm calling upon the leadership of the House and the Senate in a bipartisan way. And let's do what's necessary to demonstrate who and what we are, and let's move this country forward in a bipartisan and in a multiracial way.
Well, let me ask you, Congressman, because you've been a leader in the civil rights movement in our country for a long time, going way, way back. Give us a little sense of history right now when you saw those marchers with torches screaming out racist, anti-Semitic slurs, and you heard them say, Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Then they screamed out, you will not replace us. You will not replace us, referring to African Americans. When they uttered the slogan, blood and soil, a clear statement that we heard Nazis speak out in the 30s in Germany. What was your reaction as someone who has worked so hard in this area of civil rights all of these years?
Well, you know, I've been saying to people for a long time, my members in the Congressional Black Caucus colleagues will tell you, I've been saying to them that we are approaching the place where we've been before. I was around in the 60s, as you said, and I remember some of the sloganeering, and I remember what some of the political leaders had to say. That was a different day and a different time. We remember from our studies what happened in the 1930s in Germany. I told a business group down at Hilton Head several weeks before the election that what I saw coming was a replay of what happened in Nazi Germany. Fact of the matter is, Hitler was elected as Chancellor of Germany. He did not become a dictator until later, when people began to be influenced by his foolishness. We just elected a president, and he's got a lot of foolishness going on. And I'm afraid that too many people are being influenced by that foolishness. And so what we've got to do now is step up and say, we are not going to allow any one person to misuse an election and to abuse the process and turn this country back on its head. We are going to move forward. I think the Congress needs to step in and do what's necessary to move us forward. We've got to raise this debt ceiling so the faith and credit of the United States will not be called into question. Let's do it in a bipartisan way. I don't care whether or not it's a clean bill or a bill with other stuff hanging on it, so long as it's bipartisan. Let's do what is necessary to reform our tax code. Do that in a bipartisan way. Do the same thing for fixing the Affordable Care Act. There are problems with the Affordable Care Act. We all know it. Just like there were problems with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But we came back and fixed it in 65, and again in 68, and again in 72. That's what we need to do now, is move forward and fix the Affordable Care Act, and then let's do a bipartisan infrastructure bill that will do more than build roads and bridges. Let's have water and sewage going into communities that need them, and let's target resources in communities of need, and let's have broadband deployment so our kids can get the education that they need. The House of Representatives and the Senate need to step into the gap, and let's do what is necessary to move our country forward, because this president has marginalized himself in such a way he is never going to be able to provide any moral leadership, which is what is needed from any president in order to move an agenda.
Very strong words from Congressman James Clyburn, who I pointed out goes way back, the civil rights movement to the 60s. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Gloria, let's get some reaction. You heard him. He has lost complete faith in the President of the United States.
Look, I mean, what he is effectively saying, since the President can't fire the Congress, is that the Congress ought to make the President irrelevant, period. I think that's very difficult to do. There are lots of people whose districts and states have an awful lot of Trump supporters who will remain loyal to this president. And so it's going to take an awful lot of political sort of discussions among leaders to see how they can lead their troops. And I do believe it's up to the congressional leadership now to get together and say, what is it we can do as members of Congress to try and get this country on the same page on these kinds of important moral issues, without which we can't do anything, because that is the base of the country, not anybody's political base. It is the base of the.
Gloria's point. We had a primary yesterday in Alabama. 3 candidates.
And rightly being hailed as such for pushing his fiancée out of the way as that car plowed into those counter-protesters in Charlottesville. The couple who...
Gloria, just a moment ago, he tweeted, the President of the United States tweeted this. This is 2 minutes ago. Rather than putting pressure on the business people of the Manufacturing Council and Strategy and Policy Forum, I am ending both thank you all.
Well,
we know
it's
that
falling apart.
8 CEOs have already
Right.
resigned.
And we know that people on the Strategic and Policy Forum were discussing this morning what to do, as was the Manufacturing Council. 8 people, is it, had resigned from the Manufacturing Council. And so it's embarrassing to the president, particularly since these are the business people he was supposed to bring in, and they were going to rally around him and make America great again. And so what that was damage control, allegedly, you know, from the president, trying to kind of beat them to the punch before they all abandoned him, which is exactly what they were beginning to do, because his remarks yesterday to CEOs and business leaders in this country were completely unacceptable, as they should have been. And he was kind of like, okay, you quit, I'm firing you.
That tweet reminds me of 7th grade, when I would get word that a girl was going to break up with me, and I would call and be like, I broke up with you.
Right. I don't
Yeah,
like
I mean,
you
that's what that
anymore.
is,
I
right?
don't
I mean,
like
it's like, you know, it's a, well, we're going to disband this before you all leave and embarrass me.
And of course, with no acknowledgement whatsoever of the very things, the very real criticisms and concerns that all of these executives from different walks of life have about the president's statements. He is unwilling
The first CEO to resign was the CEO of Merck Pharmaceuticals, who's African American, and the president deliberately, I don't know deliberately, but I think he's probably the only one of these CEOs who was the subject of a direct attack on Twitter by the president.
That's precisely it. And the president has consistently acted as a craven candidate, seeking to retain his racist base, as opposed to standing up to the full measure of his office and conducting himself with some gravitas. Note this. This young woman, Heather Heyer, was being memorialized today. And our president issues a get-back tweet, a revenge tweet, instead of speaking to the moment. Her father spoke about love. Love in a democracy, in the grammar of democracy, is a verb, meaning justice. He's not spoken about justice for her in terms of holding her killer accountable. He's not shown up at the memorial service. He's not conducting himself like a president. He's acting like a craven candidate.
Well, and also, what about saying to the leaders of the business community, as someone else would do, you have a problem with what I said. Let's meet.
Correct.
Let's talk about this. Let me hear you out. Instead, he doesn't want to hear from them, because then now they're on the enemies list.
That's right.
So,
you know, anyone who
And
criticizes is on the
Right.
doesn't like me list, and therefore should be ignored and attacked.
You posted on CNN Politics a very strong article this morning, and I recommend our viewers check it out. Donald Trump's presidency is the headline. Donald Trump's presidency is on the brink of total collapse.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's going to keep a certain part of his base no matter what. They will be for him solely because there are people criticizing him, and they think those people are bad, and they will be for him.